Thanks for joining me today to find out more about the inconvenient truth about learning and why, in my opinion, learning transfer really matters. It's very inconvenient that 80 to 90% of learning is wasted. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could put a participant through a training program and they came out the other side changed? It's inconvenient that there's a whole host of other factors that determine the outcomes of learning, aside from those which we can control inside the learning environment. And what does this mean? It means that out of the $4 billion spent annually in Australia alone on training, that $3 billion of this is wasted, meaning only $1 billion is transferred into recognisable change back in the workplace. There have been numerous studies done on the transfer of learning, dating back right from 1979 with Royer talking in The Educational Psychologist, right through to Newstrom, which is quite well known, in 1985, up to this year where we have Nevroskmy writing in the Journal of Learning Science discussing transfer of learning. However, the transfer of learning dilemma remains the same. Every training group I meet, I ask them to estimate the percentage of the learning that they feel they will transfer back into the workplace. And in fact, that they've transferred back into the workplace based on their previous experience at other courses. This figure rarely gets above 10% or 20% maximum. And so this means that there's literally dusty training folders littered around the country. At last, though, learning professionals are being willing to start discussing this elephant in the room. What has always been known is suddenly becoming at the top of the agenda. The American Society of Training and Development are, in 2011, hosting a conference solely dedicated to the transfer of learning. They cite that they want to address the growing recognition that learning without transfer is incomplete. I wholeheartedly agree with this and will be using this video to explore where learning is lost and why I believe transfer of learning is a missing link in learning. Thinking about learning as a whole, when someone is commissioning a training or a learning program, what they really want is the outcome from the learning back in the business. They want the subsequent change and the business results that this will bring. And I'd question, in fact, if people don't want a specific outcome from their learning, then why are we putting people on learning or training programs in the first place? Some people feel that learning is fulfilling for learning's sake, but I believe it's only fulfilling when people can actually take it away and use it to help them get from A to B. Learning is a pathway to a different outcome, whether that's improved sales, better leadership, better retention of staff. In fact, in many ways, a learning intervention is part of a lever for creating change, where you have the challenge or the opportunity within the business on one side and the effort that the individual puts in on the other, with the learning intervention being the fulcrum or the pivot for the change about which the lever turns. So let's look typically at how a learning intervention is built up. Let's consider the process that most learning and development professionals go through when they're designing a learning program. The learning design process that many people know, or certainly a version of it, is called ADI. So faced with a business need, problem or opportunity, people who are developing learning interventions will often go through the process of A, analysing and determining what is happening within the business and what performance objectives need to be identified. D, designing, creating a roadmap for establishing the roles and objectives. The second D is for developing, creating the elements laid out in the roadmap and the design. And then I, implementing and deploying the training. The final E is for the evaluation, measuring whether the training has worked or whether the goals have been achieved. The tragedy is in the implementation phase, the implementation is often about transferring the skills and the knowledge to the individual and not transferring the skills and knowledge back into the workplace. When they leave the implementation phase of a training program, people can often demonstrate the new skills and knowledge learnt, and they will have done so in role plays and practice during the controlled learning environment. But what next? What supports them when they go back into the workplace to help them transfer the skills? In reality, most of the learning disappears down the learning black hole. Back in the old environment, at the desk with emails to answer, meetings to attend to, it's very hard for people to prioritise and put the change into place. And without an effective learning transfer strategy, the change just doesn't happen. For me, when this learning transfer piece is missed, it's almost as if you're trying to create a pivot from the flat top of a triangle with no learning intervention to create the point. The impact of this is whatever we put into the training, whether it's 10 participants or $10,000, much of the outcome is never realised. Consider this. The analysing part of the process may be done to a level of 75%, the design process maybe to 85%, the delivery piece to 95%, and then we get to the transfer and it's at a range of 10 to 20%. So the true value of all the earlier effort is never ever going to be realised as we fail at the last transfer hurdle. Now these figures are my estimates for what I see happening across the learning process. And in fact, in design and delivery, I see some really excellent work when I'm out and at client sites. What I do see though is that the finish line for training is often in the wrong place. And the assessment or the evaluation is actually completed at the end of a 2-day intervention and not when the learning transfer has happened. So we've all heard that learning is a process and not an event, but the trend tends to be to bolt on activities to an event to try and make it a longer process rather than have a sustainable transfer of learning strategy in place. In another video, I'll be looking at more transfer of learning strategies, but the bottom line is don't leave it to chance and make sure you have a strategy. Only by having a strategy in place will you realise the full outcome of your learning intervention, and without it much of your effort will be lost. Essential to your learning transfer strategy will be keeping the adult learning principles at the fore, the key one of these principles being reflection. Don't fall into the reminding trap when people return from training programs, and make sure that reflection is your key element. Equally important is ensuring that someone has ownership from the very start of the process right the way through to the transfer of training and the evaluation piece at end. So this needs to be one individual that is taking their role throughout the process, and not necessarily just where a trainer leaves at the end of an intervention. So keep ownership and reflection as your key transfer of learning principles and you will be well on the way. Today we've been setting the scene and looking at the inconvenient truth about learning in detail. In future videos I'll be discussing some more options for change. If you want to know more, do visit our website homepage www.leverlearning.com, that's L-E-V-E-R, and sign up for the contact form on this page where we'll keep you up to date with the latest and best news about transfer of learning. There are answers and it's a topic that's now gathering momentum. Make sure you're in conversation with us and please do leave your comments below as we're really keen to hear from you. Many thanks.